Hi, this is Christian Takushi, your geopolitical economist, and I'm coming to you with a new geopolitical roundup. Quite a few people have been asking us to do it. Um, this is, of course, uh, for our newsletter readers. This is especially designed for them. But yeah, if you're not one of our readers, I hope that you can still benefit somehow. Well, I want to look at the world post-US elections. Who are the likely winners and the likely losers from this important event in the US political process? And uh, we may have to structure that a little bit. I think first we're going to look at the US elections itself, then at the response of the world. There's been a reaction from the world. And then we're going to look a little bit at the Middle East. Yeah, the different conflicts and wars that are raging currently in the world. So, going to look at this, the United States, the response of the world to the US elections, and then the current conflicts. As you know, we like to look at things um, from the long-term perspective, historical perspective, and also um, with a big picture in mind. And when we do that, we see that what is happening in this year, it's just a continuation of the trends that we have been forecasting, but also monitoring recently. Allow me then to use a few slides just to um, you know uh, make this a little bit easier to explain. Um, what we are seeing currently in the world, even the United States, is part of what happens when major geopolitical trends overlap with macroeconomic trends. This overlap of geopolitical and macroeconomic trends at aggregate levels is causing friction and change. And what we're seeing in the world today, in the US, Europe, the Middle East, even Russia, Ukraine, is very much a result of this overlap. And those that follow our research since 2010 know that we have 10 major geopolitical and macroeconomic trends that we follow. And uh, amongst these trends is the deterioration of demographics, the inexorable deterioration of the Middle East, the inexorable deterioration of the fiscal monetary discipline of the West being in a trap, but also the rise of emerging markets. Yes, fiscally healthy, monetarily healthy emerging markets are rising. And I'm not speaking about the BRICS, by the way. Many experts really don't know much about emerging markets. They think BRICS is emerging markets. Yeah. And we also have been predicting since the year 2014, 2015, the world is on track and on the path for major conflicts and wars. We've been saying this since 2014, that we're going to have more wars. Apologies for the nose, more wars and more conflicts, and that we foresee three major wars in the world, three major wars, all of them in the Northern Hemisphere. And these large scale wars are inexorable. I see no way we can avert them. I think the open hostilities are just a matter of time. And so the question is, can we postpone this? Can we delay this? Right. So with this in mind, I'd like to address the issue that so many people are asking us about. How does the world look like after these US elections? And again, as an economist and investor, I always like to look at the winners and the losers because that's what people want to know in a way, right? There's so much we could say, really, so much we can say. And again, those who are interested in this cannot, a little video doesn't cover this. But if you want to know more, please feel free to subscribe to our geopolitical newsletter. There we focus on strategic trends and how we see the world changing. But let's look at the U.S. elections from this big picture perspective. And allow me to start with this. We see the U.S. facing tremendous risks. But at the same time, we see also the very likely coming of an economic boom. So we see the U.S. facing severe risks, but also experiencing a big economic boom. It could be a massive economic boom. And those things are probably going hand in hand. Additionally, we also see China and certain emerging markets in Asia and Latin America entering a boom, I don't want to say a boom for China, but for these economies, a boom. So I think that China and economies in Asia and Latin America are going to be benefiting from trade and agilization and certain dynamics in their trade relationship. So to some extent, China and certain emerging markets, especially those that are fiscally healthy and that have growth dynamics, are also winners in this period. The big losers so far, the biggest loser by far, I see Europe, and this is not something new. I think the situation is only getting worse than what we had even expected a few years ago. So, but how do we get there? Let's explain. I hope that in the next few minutes we can add a little bit of substance to what I just said, because anybody can make forecasts, right? Anybody can make forecasts. Another thing is to back it up with some analysis. And sometimes the analysis is more important than the forecast itself, okay? Three takeaways from the overlap that is happening in the world currently at aggregate levels. First of all, the massive implosion of the labor forces in the Northern Hemisphere is deflationary. On the other hand, the massive fiscal monetary expansion that we have in the Northern Hemisphere as well, especially in the West, is highly inflationary. This is not contradictory. This is actually, these deflationary forces are forcing or have induced our central banks to print a lot of money, thinking they can get away with that. So the result of that is being an even more monetary stimulus. And what we have had ultimately net is a very massive monetary fiscal stimulus over the past 49 years, especially in the West. And we ended up with asset price inflation. And what I call artificial prosperity. We have been pushing up the prices of houses, of stocks and bonds, cars and art. Basically, what we have generated in the West is an artificial rise of asset prices. Unfortunately, economists and banks are only focusing on the consumer goods, the consumer basket, and that's where they look for inflation. But inflation is not limited to the consumer basket or the CPI. Inflation is almost everywhere. And that's why young people cannot afford a house or a home anymore, because those prices are too high, right? So we have in the West what I call the wealth illusion. And not just the West, some countries in China, to some extent, we find that too, but especially in the West, 49 years of excessive fiscal spending and monetary stimulus have created what I call a wealth illusion, with a lot of asset prices being pushed up artificially. The second area is of this overlap is the vulnerability of certain trading routes, especially the ones linking Europe with Asia. Yeah. So this vulnerability of these trading routes are a result also of the dismantling of the military by Europe, something that we've been doing in Europe over 22, 23 years. A tragic, terrible mistake, and illustration that here in Europe, our leaders and our academia has a very bad foresight, a very weak ability to foresee the future. Our strategic geopolitical foresight is almost non-existent here in Europe and has led to very, very big strategic mistakes. And those mistakes are compounding. As a result of those mistakes, we see that the United States and Britain are increasingly struggling to protect our trading routes. And this is something that we have had, that we have actually been expected since 2015, 2016. And so years before the Suez Canal was really, kind of blocked, years before the Houthis were attacking ships in the Middle East. So the routes between Europe and Asia are in trouble, are very vulnerable. This is what I call access denial. And China doesn't suffer as much as Europe, and I will tell you later why. Because China has seen this coming, and they've been investing a lot in preparing boosting their trade capabilities with Latin America. So China has been investing a lot of money and effort in improving the maritime routes between Asia and Latin America. We will see later with the mega port of Chancay how that has now become reality. So, but finally, as we have been warning since the year 2010, we've been warning that free trade without reciprocity, free trade with autocratic nations like China, without reciprocity would lead to the West being in a trap. The West will end up in a trap sooner or later. The ones that benefit from this total trade, free trade, without reciprocity with such autocratic nations are the big corporations and those autocratic nations, but not the middle class in the West. And the biggest problem is that at one point we are in a trap, depending on China for our supply chains, but also, for instance, Europe depending on Russia for our energy, right? And I'm not saying here that China or Russia are being aggressive towards us. I think we have maneuvered ourselves into that trap. And if China and Russia are doing their homework, they have to advance their national interests at our expense. So these countries, China, Russia, BRICS, they have to take advantage of our mistakes, of our predicament to advance their national interest. We would do the same because every nation has every government has the duty to advance its national interest, right? And with the West sitting in this trap, we have the situation that America is becoming more self-centered, but also more assertive because it's been challenged, right? So this is a new situation, I think, for many people. And what do you have when the world is on collision course and there are geopolitical conflicts and tensions? Well, you have a rise of disinformation. That's what we see here, the rise of disinformation for national security reasons. So increasingly, you cannot rely on what nations are giving you in terms of economic data or announcements because they cannot tell you everything. They know that the neighbors, even the allies, are competitors. We might be at war soon, or in conflict. So we cannot tell everybody everything. Countries have to be cautious with what they say. So we see the rise of disinformation, which means we have to analyze what we read and what we see. And the three overlaps here is just some of the overlaps that actually help explain what we're going to see now. Yeah. And I will actually begin to talk about this China strategy in Latin America. Last week, China and Peru inaugurated the mega port of Chancay. This port was an idea of Peruvian entrepreneurs many years ago. Those Peruvian entrepreneurs visited the US. They wanted American investors to invest. They were not interested. They approached European investors. They were also not interested. Why? We were simply enjoying zero interest rates for our companies. Investing in Latin America, not interested. We make profits by buying back our shares and by borrowing money at almost zero interest rates. With borrowed money, we can buy other competitors or buy back our own shares. So that is being so much easier to make earnings or boosting earnings per share in the United States and Europe to some extent over the past 14, 15 years. So no wonder that those Peruvian entrepreneurs had very little interest in the West. Who got interested? Finally, they went to China, and the Chinese got very interested in this. Xi Jinping was very excited about this project when he saw it, because he realized that Peru is in a very strategic position in Latin America, and that Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Chile, they have everything that Asia needs to develop well over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So even if you want to implement net zero, you need South America. Without copper, you don't go anywhere. And there is going to be a lack of copper soon. So this port has been built in recent years, is one of the largest ports in the Americas, and many experts are saying it's the most modern port in the world. It's very difficult to say that, of course, but it's definitely one of the most advanced mega ports in the world. Everything is automated there and electrical. The interesting thing is mega ships are going to be able to dock there. So ships transporting 18,000, 22,000, 24,000 containers are going to be able to come there. The interesting thing is that ships from Asia are going to travel directly to Chancay port in Peru and bring the goods there, but at the same time, they're going to be able to pick up and collect the resources from Latin America there and bring them directly to Asia. In the past, they did a call in Peru, then another call in Mexico, and another call in Los Angeles, and then they went on to Asia. The ports were also not that big. Now it's going to be different. There is so much. I mean, the trade between Asia and Latin America is so huge. There is no need to go to Mexico and to do another call in Los Angeles. So with this port, the shipping time between Asia and Latin America is going to be reduced by roughly 30%. 30% is a lot. The cost itself, monetary costs, are also going to be reduced by 20% monetarily speaking. But the overall economic efficiency gains are dramatic, are really, and depending on the country and the good and the type of goods, it's different. But it can be between 20 and 42%, between 20 and 42% of economic efficiency gains that this port is going to bring to Asia and Latin America. Now you understand why I've been saying that the biggest winners of what happened in the United States on November 5th, are going to be most likely the United States, albeit with some very big risks, There's going to be, I think, a lot of sabotage internally. You know that the Democrats are not going on vacations. They want to disrupt this government as much as they can because they believe that this is the last this is the last elections. Well, if they believe what they've been saying, these are the last elections in the United States. Some of them are already leaving, so they're not gonna just sit down quietly. They will sabotage this as much as they can, and even some Trump aides, by implementing some of their policies, are going to create risks of their own. For instance, pushing up Bitcoin a lot is creating some disruption in the bond markets, sending signals to the bond market, disrupting commodity demand already. So there are a few things that some Trump aides are doing that I don't want to say they don't know what they're doing, but that could be disruptive in itself. So it's not just Democrats disrupting. I think Trump policies could be disruptive in itself and create risk. So we're going to see, I believe, a tremendous risk in the United States in the coming years, but most likely a tremendous economic boom, a big economic boom in the United States. I also see China and Latin American nations and Southeast Asian nations benefiting from increased trade. This port of Chancay is just an example. It's just probably the tip of the iceberg. But countries in Asia and Latin America really want to cut tariffs and improve trade. They're investing in it. And the Brazilians are probably going to be the biggest beneficiaries of this new port in Peru. I mean, can you imagine the Brazilians benefiting even more? Yeah, because they're on the other side of the continent. They have to travel 45 days to reach China and Japan. With this, they might be able to do it in 32 days. But if they build a railway through the Amazon and the Andes to Peru, I mean, the benefits could be even bigger. So the Amazon jungle is now awakening to the possibility of improving its trade with Asia thanks to this port. I mean, a lot of things are being set in motion now. So what we see now is the United States entering a new period. People may call it being a bit more self-centered. I don't think it paints it says the whole picture. These elections in the United States are setting off a period of tougher trade policies, but also tougher foreign policies. It's not the beginning of it, Rod. It's actually a continuation, I would say. For the last 10 years, we've seen a trend towards tougher US trade policies and tougher US foreign policies. We had it already with the end of the Obama period. We've had it with President Trump, his first term, and we've also had it with Biden. So I always told people in Europe, if you think that Trump is not good for you, wait for Biden. I've said it many times and people laugh at that, but it's true. I think that Biden hurt Europe more than Trump. Please look at how Europe has impoverished during the Biden years. It's been dramatic. The impoverishment, how Britain, Germany, France have impoverished, Europe in general, during the Biden years has been incredible, more so than when Trump was in charge. So I think this is just a continuation, but an acceleration of this tougher, more assertive US trade policy and foreign policy, something that fits into what we've been painting or predicting for more than 10 years. A more assertive foreign policy, monetary policy, and even trade policy. Why? Because the world is going into a period of more geopolitical tensions and more conflicts. We predicted in 2015 that the world is going into a period of conflicts and wars. And I remember in some conferences in Europe, some nice places, some nice conferences in Lake Geneva, Montreux, or Zurich at the Grand Hyatt. I remember some economists and strategists said, Mr. Takushi, the analysis looks brilliant, but wars, conflicts, come on, we are enjoying the peace dividend. And with free trade, all the experts are telling us free trade guarantees peace. Free trade guarantees peace. And I always had to challenge that, saying this is wrong. More free trade is not going to bring more peace, rather the opposite, because we forgot to do more free trade with reciprocity. And therefore, the Pareto optimality, the simple Pareto optimality theory does not apply. Unfortunately, the facts have proven us right that uncontrolled free trade would bring conflicts. My friends, you should know that currently in the world we have 120 conflicts. Yeah, 120. Yeah. So let's go there. We have 120 conflicts raging in the Northern Hemisphere, just the Northern Hemisphere. And here in these circles, you see only the most important ones, the most serious ones. Um, as a result of all these conflicts in the Eurasian continent, the maritime trading routes in this big circle here, these routes are vulnerable or at risk, right? So it's actually a very difficult situation that we have in the world. So many conflicts. And I believe that this is just part of what we've been predicting. The world is on course for three major wars. These are three large-scale wars, and at least one of them is going to be fought with nuclear weapons, unfortunately, I think. This is our analysis, completely independent, objective. I have no partisan views here, and we don't have any party that we have to respect here in terms of respecting their views. This is just objective analysis. And I think what we have now is probably a period of grace where large-scale war is going to be delayed. I think one way or the other, it's possible for this war in the Middle East and the one in Ukraine to be settled. I think so. I think there are some possibilities for them to be settled, and but I think this is Trump-style peace, which I call the end of hostilities, the end of open hostilities. But this is not lasting peace. I don't think that we're going to have lasting peace. What we're going to get is a cessation of hostilities in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, but not lasting peace. And in my opinion, the conflicts are going to reappear and resurge much more violently in years to come. And the question is, what do you do as a business leader? What do you do as a head of a family? What do you do as an investor, right? Well, I think that you have to understand crises are opportunities. Crises are always opportunities. For those who are prepared, for those who think ahead and plan ahead and prepare one way or the other, conflicts, even war, is an opportunity. For those that don't prepare, that are in denial or that panic, for those that don't prepare, of course, conflicts are a problem, just a problem. The conflicts cannot be something positive. Okay. I want to also remind of people that are not acquainted with our research that we do have a project that monitors the best or most viable geopolitical safe havens. So the geopolitically safest nations, we track them and we rank them. And currently, the top three geopolitical safe havens are all in the Southern Hemisphere, quite interestingly, Uruguay, Mauritius, and New Zealand. By the way, earlier this year, Mauritius took on the spot of New Zealand, which had been number 2 until recently. So very interesting changes there. And allow me to go even one step ahead, what that means. The conflicts in the Northern Hemisphere are creating winners. And the United States is likely to be one of these big winners in the short term. Not just because of the Trump policies, but also because of these Trump policies. As I showed earlier, the trading routes between Asia and Europe are probably the most affected ones from all the overlaps and convergence of global geopolitical and economic trends. And also because of the huge mistakes that Europe has done. And I think it's a mistake. If you want to expand east, you cannot dismantle your military. I always said it. If you expand, if you expand into the east, talk to Russia, make sure that they don't see it as a threat. But even if you don't do that, at least, and if you don't want to talk to Russia, and if they don't like this, at least do not dismantle your military. Rather the opposite, build up your military, because you're going to need a strong military deterrent against Russia. Otherwise, we are going to be exposing some of these Eastern European countries to a lot of risk, which is what we have done with Ukraine, I think. So I think the EU has made a few big mistakes in not expanding its navy, not expanding its military while it was expanding east. And one thing we should have done is to have a very strong reinforcement of our maritime routes along the Middle East, throughout the Middle East. In the last 10 years, 15 years, we should have been expanding that. I was warning and asking for that. We need to reinforce and build up a very strong naval presence across the Middle East to protect our maritime routes, because the whole Northern Hemisphere is going to become more difficult with more conflicts. But it was not done. I received, everywhere I went, I received the same message. Our experts unanimously are saying that with more free trade, we're going to have more peace. So we are actually, Mr. Takushi, we're dismantling our military in Europe. Well, with this situation, Asia, Southeast Asia, Australasia, Southeast Asia, Australasia on the one hand, and Latin America are the biggest winners, But now, given the fact that Europe doesn't want to change its strategy and wants to stick to the net zero strategy, the net zero strategy means that Europe alone has to invest more than 20,000 billion US dollars in energy related investments. For 80% of those investments, just copper is vital. So the UK is doing the same. So just because of this net zero effort in Europe, we're going to need a lot of copper, and we don't have enough copper. We don't have enough copper to meet that demand. And copper is just one of the elements we'll need. Because of the energy policies that we have, Latin America is going to be even more in demand than Australasia. But the two regions are going to benefit. Southeast Asia, Australasia, and Latin America are the big beneficiaries. And when you add to that the fact that China and Peru have built this modern mega port in Peru, you see now why Latin America is becoming the new focus of the competition between the superpowers. It's very clear that the United States and China and the other world powers are focusing now on Latin America, and especially South America, because of their resources. And there are a number of countries that are under tremendous focus because of the resources that they have, and also the food they have and the resources. For instance, Brazil produces a lot of soya, but Brazil uses genetically modified crops like the United States. Peru, on the other hand, is a home base of organic food, and there is a huge demand for organic food. But when you talk about resources, materials, Chile, Argentina, Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil are important, very important for economic growth in the coming years. So all the economic powers, be it France, UK, Spain, Italy, China, Korea, Japan, the United States, Canada, they all need access. They all would like to have access to these countries in South America that I just mentioned: Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, and to some extent Bolivia as well. So this is interesting how this part of the world is becoming highly contested, right? Highly contested. And my message is, The biggest winners economically, the United States, followed by emerging countries, and emerging countries that are fiscally healthy and that are also geopolitically neutral or stable. They can play both sides. Just by playing China, that's not going to be good enough. I think you're going to have to play. You're going to have a certain balance between Europe, the United States, China, etc. Yeah, and not all countries can play this well, can do this well. So this is uh, one of the key messages that I had. I would like to mention something that happened last week. Last week, all the world leaders, most of world leaders were in Peru and in Brazil. We had the APEC meeting, the APEC Summit of Asia Pacific Economic Powers in Peru. 21 leaders were there. And we also had the G20 meeting in Rio de Janeiro in the same week. Yes, it's amazing. So the whole world descended over Latin America to discuss the US elections and how we're going to deal with it. And I just want to give you some, just sometimes anecdotal evidence speaks volumes. In the same week that China was opening this mega port in Chancay, the United States gave a donation to Peru for trains. And I think that Peruvians in Lima were very excited by that donation because it could benefit 3 million disadvantaged people east of the capital, Lima. Wonderful. It's great. But the world leaders that were present, especially from Asia, got the message. The message they got is Western powers, the United States, is still looking at emerging markets and the developing markets as countries that they should help, that they should tell, they should tell what to do in a way. So we are still stuck. The United States look like a little bit stuck in its old model of vision of Latin America. How can we help you? Can we give you some medicine? Can we build a hospital for you? Can we give you a donation? So while the United States and Europe are still in this mode of how can we help you? What can we donate to you? And also in the mode of you need to change your laws here. We want to tell you that now you've applied this. Now you need to change these laws. And in Africa and Asia and Latin America, they're very angry about the fact that we go there and tell them, now you need to change your gender laws, your sex laws, gender laws. You need to teach your children this and that. So they don't take it very lightly that we are mixing our donations with expectations on how they should teach their children or how they should change their laws to implement our new values, right? So because our values have been changing in recent decades. So we have embraced new values that we would like those countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa to also implement. So I'm sharing how it came across. Okay, I'm not saying this is what we want to do in the West, but it came across as that. And on the other hand, you had China really investing in a huge project that is going to cost 3,500 million US dollars. It's going to have $3.5 billion project, big. But it's not the amount of money. It's taking many years in preparing, many years in constructing. The final phase was just 4 years, but it takes a lot of years to prepare because you also had to start building the mega ships that will serve this route. Changing the routes of commerce is a big undertaking. So at the same time, and it's not just China, I also want to mention the example of South Korea. What was because everybody's focused on China, right? China doesn't make the whole world. I give you another example. South Korea was also busy. South Korea brought a big delegation to Peru in South America. And what were they doing? They are trying to, they have recognized that these countries have potential, that Peru cannot just sell raw materials, they have discovered that Peruvians have a lot of good technicians and engineers, and that they can build ships. Yes, the South Koreans know, they've paid attention. The Peruvians can build ships, amazing ships. The second largest naval school ship in the world that is using, sails, these traditional big sails ships. The second largest was built in Peru. It's going around the world. So the South Koreans discovered that this country in South America has also manufacturing skills. So South Korea is now investing in Peru to build warships, to build also land assets like military vehicles for land warfare, and also helping Peru build military training planes. And more importantly, they want to build their parts, complicated, complex parts, vital parts for fighter jets. They want to build parts for modern fighter jets, fourth generation, fifth generation fighter jets. So this is interesting what they're doing. Production, assembly. So basically, South Korea is making Peru a strategic partner in the area of defense, and they're increasing military production there. That is a lot of investing. How long does it take? Well, the Koreans started doing this in 2010. So for the last, say, it took 2 years to start implementing that. Let's say 2012. Yeah. If you take that 2012, it's now been 12 years of work. 12 years of work. And they've been building airplanes together. They've been building ships together, right? It's a lot of effort. And now in this year, in the same week of this APEC summit, they declare, we have done our homework. We're going to build also mega ships in Peru. Yeah, they said, this is now coming from the largest ship builder in the world, Hyundai. Hyundai Heavy says, we also want to build mega ships in the future in Peru. And they have steel, they have resources. And by the way, they have 25% of the components that they need for a ship. And actually, according to the latest tally, is probably kind of closer to 45% because it's attracting other industry now. The interesting thing is, while Asians are investing in South America, what are we doing in the West? And I don't want to criticize what we do because we do this out of a good heart. It's out of our vision that we have, that we see the poor people. We see the poor people. We want to donate some equipment. We want to donate a train. And we also think that we need to bring these people up to our cultural, legal standards. So we're telling them also how they should change the laws, maybe make them more gender friendly, gender law. And we also have, what also we do, something that upsets people in South America a lot, is that we also finance gender policy friendly activities like drag queen celebrations, something that most South Americans would never drag queen celebrations is not something that most South Americans are dreaming of. They're quite Catholic and conservative societies for the most part, but we are financing heavily with our money and our NGOs activities, this kind of change there. And by financing this, we are making it, of course, more popular. So this, of course, is creating in those countries of Africa, Asia, Latin America, a sense of, please change the view you have of us. Don't bring your laws, don't bring your values to us. How about just doing business together? And this is what the Koreans and the Chinese are doing. I mean, I could mention other countries. I could also mention Japan, but I just mentioned 2 countries because everybody's talking about China and it makes things look like it's just about China. It's not. The Koreans are doing something in Peru that is helping accelerate the rise of assembly, manufacturing, and production in this country. And if they can do it in Peru, they can do it in other countries of Latin America. Now, think of this port. The South Koreans are probably going to move the production, new production facilities closer to these ports so that they can export from there, right? So isn't that interesting? You have now, people are talking about Latin America in the hands of China. That's a little bit cheap, superficial analysis. Cheap, superficial analysis because well, since we've been talking, we could talk about Chile, we could talk about Argentina, we could talk about Uruguay, a very interesting country that is also doing a very nice balancing act between the powers, superpowers. We could talk about Brazil. Even Brazil is balancing. But since we've been talking about Peru, let's continue there. I've heard a lot of people saying Peru has sold out to China. Really? You know, if you know China and the Far East a little bit, you know that the United States is using Japan and South Korea to contain China, right? So militarily, South Korea and Japan are the biggest enemies that China has in its region. South Korea and Japan are our key allies of the United States to contain China militarily, and also North Korea. And if you know about military, you know that Japan and South Korea have been building up, investing in their military already for the last 10, 15 years, a lot. Japan and especially South Korea have very advanced military technology. Now, Peru has chosen one of these key contenders of China militarily in its own region as its new key defense partner, right? So Peru's new strategic military partner is South Korea. Militarily, that's not a friend of China. So the message that Peru is sending here, hey, you welcome you, China, for trade and commerce, but you have to understand that the United States is a very strong political, historical ally of Peru, and we are also using, South Korea as our new strategic defense partner. So you see, countries in Latin America don't want to become completely dependent on China. And this is the same in Africa and Asia. If these countries have a choice, they would like to have a balance between Europe, China, and the United States, and make it work, make it function. It is in their own interest. So I think that's something that we can take from this, and I believe that European countries should engage more in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America because the opportunities are big. Europe doesn't have to be the big loser of this second Trump term or Trump administration. The opportunities in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are huge, absolutely huge. And by European powers getting more involved there will be more profit for our companies, more jobs for our young people, and the presence of European powers there would improve stability. Yes. I always tell governments and officials and business people in Latin America, welcome British companies, welcome French companies, welcome German companies too, because all of these companies will help balance out the risks, right? If you have, since we're talking about, it's not the only country, since we're talking about Peru, let's talk about France. France has won a big competition to build a massive central motorway that will link the coast with the Andes, the tip of the Andes. It's going to cost at least $7 billion US. And it's going to generate a lot of work for French companies, engineers, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the way to do it. Actually, I think that Britain should have gotten this deal. I mean, Britain could have won this, but I think Britain was perceived as too close to Washington policy, and those countries wanted to have a little bit of diversification. They wanted to have a US ally, but not everything in the hands of the US either. So They perceive the US is important, but it's become a little bit unpredictable, a little bit domestic driven in its policies. So maybe France is a bit safer, right? France is a bit safer. So you see how geopolitics is influencing also. And I think France is the best example at the moment of a European power that is taking advantage of this huge rivalry between China and the United States, taking advantage of this big rivalry to win contracts. Yes. And so, but Spain could do the same. The UK could do the same. Germany could do the same. Actually, a few years ago, if you follow our research, you knew that I was expecting the UK to be the biggest beneficiary in Europe from the rivalry competition between China and the United States. I was wrong about that. I could have never expected London to be so close to Washington policy. I was expecting London to remain a very dependable US ally, but to be a little bit different, a bit more autonomy to win big defense contracts, big engineering contracts, big trade deals with emerging markets, because quite a number of emerging markets are swimming in cash, have a lot of money. There are 9 emerging markets with a lot of money to invest. And so I am happy to share this because my assessment is that Europe is the biggest loser from the second Trump administration. But I want to remind you that where there is change and crisis, there is also opportunity. So it's up to European companies and powers to go out to areas where there is growth, dynamics, young population, and also resources for them to get exposed and to win contracts. I want to finish now with something relating to the conflicts and the wars that we're seeing. As you know, I expect more conflicts and ultimately 3 major large-scale wars. And I'm not talking about the managed wars we've had in the last 60 years, because most of the wars we had since World War II have been managed wars, really. Total war is something very, very different. Total war is bombing cities. In total war, you kill 20,000, 90,000, 150,000 civilians in one day. That's total war, unfortunately. And I think we're going towards total wars again. And those are not the total wars that you can manage out of Geneva or through the International Court of Justice. In total wars, there are no rules because it's about life or death, every nation for itself. And we already have been saying, we're already begun the period where everyone is on its own. Every nation is now on its own. This is why all the blocs and alliances are weak now, because there's huge distrust, even within the EU, within NATO, or within the ASEAN, or within Mercosur, or the Pacific Alliance in South America, or even in this great, cooperation thing in China, or the BRICS. All alliances are in trouble because it's everyone for himself. So, as we have said in recent years, there are now more alliances than powers. Why? Because there are now hidden alliances, secret alliances between different powers, even with enemies. Okay. And so it is in this context that I want to say that I see the very high likelihood of cessation of hostilities in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe very soon, I think. Very soon. And it's possible that Israel will do something regarding Iran before that happens. The problem is that before cessation of hostilities, you have the period of the biggest risk. The biggest risk is before the cessation of hostilities, because there are always powers that don't want the end to hostilities, and there are always powers that would like to win the most and position themselves the most before that. So the next coming weeks are risky. I have been recommending people to build a safety backup location for their families and their businesses for the commercial business data in the Southern Hemisphere, whether it is New Zealand, Mauritius, or Uruguay. I've been recommending them to build a backup base for their families. And I think, for instance, as an example, the next 2 months would be such a time to bring your family into safety there, because I believe the next coming weeks might be exceedingly risky or volatile, and not just because of the transition of power in the United States. But if you've noticed, President Biden has not been particularly lame, has not been particularly a very good lame duck in the last couple of weeks. I mean, after November 5th, he changed his tag on the ATACMS missiles used in the war in Ukraine very late, by the way, very late. And then Secretary Blinken was being given the green light also to announce that the United States recognizes the opposition as the, as the real legal, as the real winner of the elections. So in Venezuela, So why did the United States wait so late? So this is like taking very big, active, very big decisions in foreign policy after the elections. This is not necessarily the typical transition of power. It's because of these kind of things that these next couple of weeks are going to be difficult. It doesn't have to be dangerous. It doesn't have to be dangerous. I see some path here. If everybody uses common sense, I see several paths for a clear cessation of hostilities in the Middle East, and the same for Eastern Europe. But, you cannot control what other people do. And there are countries that don't want this to stop. There are interests. There are certain interest groups that don't want this war, for instance, in Eastern Europe, to end. There are people who have something to lose. And they're also in Europe. People always talk about the deep state in the US. I think we have to be careful. No one has forced Europe to do this. We ultimately thought it was good to go there. We ultimately want to do this. And we cannot always blame the deep state for everything that is happening in Europe. Ultimately, in Europe, this is our home, our area, and we have to, I think, take responsibility for what happens here in Europe. And I think that even in Europe, there are powers and circles that would lose a lot if there is, a cessation of hostilities right now. And I think that also it's understandable that people are worried about justice. I don't think that the cessation of hostilities will come along justice. The differences in perspectives are so radically different. There is no time for that, I think. And I have the impression that President Trump will not try to give justice to everyone. He will just try to impose or to negotiate a cessation of hostilities in the hope that with time, with trade and peace, a more lasting peace and more lasting negotiations can actually be achieved and be attainable. The same for the Middle East. I don't believe that this is the last war that will be fought in the Middle East. Yes, that's my view on the the situation of these conflicts. These conflicts that we're seeing are just part of a long trend of rising hostilities and growing conflicts. And I want to go back to this ranking. In the past, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the top 3 spots for the most geopolitically safe countries in the world were all Nordic countries or countries in the Northern Hemisphere, so-called Western legacy countries like Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, Austria, Canada, New Zealand, etc., etc. But over the years, uh, the rising conflicts in the Northern Hemisphere has been having an impact on this ranking. And you see now that Uruguay, Mauritius, and New Zealand are the safest countries, geopolitically speaking. Geopolitically speaking means the likelihood that these countries will be involved in wars over the next 3 to 5 years, right? It's not the only criteria that you should use, because there are other things like taxation, quality of life, that people want to consider too. Yeah. I also want to finish with this. There are countries that have underestimated growth opportunities in this uh, post-election period, in this second Trump administration. There are countries that have very good growth opportunities. And I will mention them. The United States, Singapore, Paraguay, Uruguay, Peru, Brazil, Mauritius, Botswana, Ghana. Actually, I didn't write Tanzania there, but it is actually, it's not far away from Ghana. Romania, France, United Kingdom, Oman, Indonesia, and New Zealand. So I think that there is actually quite a lot there, and I can say also that China is a big is actually a big winner, but not necessarily in terms of economic growth, because I think that China is changing its focus away from just trying to achieve economic growth to trying to achieve resiliency for the future conflicts. And China, I think, is going to be advancing that. Its resilience to future conflicts, establishing new trading routes, new areas of development. And that development is a period of restructuring that is maybe not necessarily the best for headline economic growth numbers. But it could also be that China may have a lot of economic growth, but remember, the Chinese labor force is shrinking. So I personally don't think that China is going to shine with a lot of, high nominal GDP growth numbers. But again, the question is, should we just be focusing on growth, right? Resilience is becoming a very interesting topic. But talking about economic growth and investment opportunities, I would like to mention these countries. And these countries that I mentioned here are countries that have the potential to attract a lot of investments. And I mentioned that because quite a lot of investors follow us. I mean, most of the people reading our geopolitical newsletter are investors. And so this video has been basically made especially, it's being made especially for our newsletter readers, to provide a little bit of additional information, complementary. So this video is complementary for our newsletter readers. They will make the most out of that. But if you're not a newsletter reader, I think that you still might be able to benefit from. I hope that you have also benefited from watching this short video. This would be countries where it's interesting to look for investments in general. Okay, please do not take anything I've said as an investment recommendation that you have to go ahead. These are just ideas. Okay, just ideas. You have to do your own homework. You have to contact your banker. You have to contact your solicitor, your lawyers. Everybody should have a small team of advisors before taking, team of advisors. You should consult your advisors, at least your spouse, before you make any important decisions. Okay, I want to thank you for your kind attention, and I hope that this was useful. This is Christian Takushi, your geopolitical economist from Switzerland.